Just when America believed the Alex Murdaugh case was finally over, a shocking courtroom development in May 2026 changed everything. A verdict once seen as final was suddenly thrown into question, raising one disturbing possibility. What if one of the country's biggest true crime decisions was never truly settled? For generations, the Murdaugh name ruled South Carolina's legal world. Then, one quiet summer night, everything changed in ways no one expected. In the heart of Colleton County, South Carolina, the Murdaugh family name carried extraordinary influence. For nearly a century, the family had built a powerful legal legacy that stretched across courtrooms, law offices, and local politics. To many residents, the Murdaughs represented status, authority, and tradition. At the center of that legacy stood Alex Murdaugh, a well-known personal injury attorney from a respected legal dynasty. He lived a life many people admired from a distance. Wealth, connections, large properties, and a recognizable family name gave the appearance of success. Alongside him was his wife, Maggie, known for her active social life and deep ties to the community. Their younger son, Paul, was often described as outgoing and energetic. From the outside, the family appeared settled into a privileged world built over generations. But behind that image, serious problems were quietly growing. By the summer of 2021, financial pressure had reportedly begun closing in around Alex. Questions about missing money and irregular financial activity had started surfacing inside his law firm. According to investigators and later court testimony, millions of dollars had quietly disappeared over several years. The allegations suggested money meant for vulnerable clients had been redirected without permission. At the same time, another source of pressure was building around the family. Paul Murdaugh had become connected to a highly publicized legal case following a fatal boating incident in 2019. The case attracted significant public attention across South Carolina and brought growing scrutiny to the Murdaugh family. Legal hearings and civil claims increased pressure, while media coverage intensified interest in the family's private affairs. Friends and observers later described a household carrying visible stress, though few understood the full picture. Then came the evening that would permanently alter everything. On June 7, 2021, Alex Murdaugh contacted emergency responders from the family's rural hunting property known as Moselle, located in Colleton County. During the call, he reported finding Maggie and Paul near the dog kennels on the property. The news spread quickly. For local residents, it was difficult to process. The Murdaugh family had spent generations inside courtrooms seeking justice for others. Now, their own family tragedy had become the center of a major investigation. In the early days following the incident, sympathy poured in. Many people viewed Alex as a grieving husband and father facing unimaginable loss. Community members, longtime friends, and legal colleagues expressed support as investigators worked to piece together what had happened that night. At first, public attention focused outward. Questions surrounded possible outside threats, especially because of the legal attention already tied to Paul's boating case. Speculation grew online and in news reports. Some wondered whether anger connected to past legal disputes had somehow reached the family. But investigators continued examining the timeline carefully. As evidence slowly emerged, attention began shifting toward details that seemed difficult to ignore. Among the most important discoveries was cell phone data, timeline evidence, and recorded conversations that placed increasing focus on the final hours before Maggie and Paul lost their lives. For months, investigators reconstructed movements, phone records, and witness accounts to understand who had been present at Moselle that evening. Then came a detail that dramatically changed the direction of the case. A cell phone video recorded by Paul shortly before the incident reportedly captured voices in the background near the dog kennels. Prosecutors later argued that one of those voices belonged to Alex Murdaugh. The timing immediately raised difficult questions. Earlier statements suggested Alex had not been near the kennels shortly before discovering Maggie and Paul. But the recording appeared to place him there much closer to the timeline than previously believed. The discovery became one of the most discussed elements of the investigation. Meanwhile, separate financial concerns surrounding Alex were becoming harder to ignore. Investigators uncovered allegations involving millions of dollars in missing funds tied to legal settlements, clients, and business accounts. What first appeared to be isolated concerns soon expanded into a much larger financial investigation. The picture growing behind the scenes looked increasingly serious. Prosecutors would later argue that Alex had been facing enormous financial pressure. According to their theory, years of hidden financial activity were nearing exposure. Questions inside his law firm were reportedly intensifying, and legal pressure appeared to be mounting. The prosecution believed timing mattered. They argued that the events at Moselle created a sudden shift in attention, moving focus away from financial questions and toward public sympathy surrounding a devastating family tragedy. Still, the case remained deeply divisive. Supporters of Alex questioned the strength of the evidence. Some believed investigators had moved too quickly toward one conclusion. Others argued there were too many unanswered questions surrounding the property, timeline, and possible motives. As months passed, national attention exploded. Television programs, legal analysts, and true crime audiences across the country followed every update. What had started as a shocking local tragedy became one of America's most closely watched courtroom stories. The reason was larger than one family. The case involved power, privilege, money, and a legal dynasty that once seemed untouchable. People wanted answers to a question that felt almost impossible to understand. What truly happened on that quiet June night? And if investigators were right, why would someone from one of South Carolina's most influential families risk losing everything? By 2022, pressure surrounding the investigation reached a new level. State prosecutors officially moved forward, accusing Alex Murdaugh of responsibility in the deaths of Maggie and Paul. The allegations shocked supporters and intensified national debate. The courtroom battle ahead promised to become one of the most closely watched legal cases in modern American history. But no one yet realized that years later, a stunning development would shake the case once again and leave the country questioning whether the final outcome had truly been decided fairly. Because the biggest twist in the Alex Murdaugh story had not happened yet. As the legal case moved forward, attention surrounding Alex Murdaugh grew rapidly. What had begun as a deeply personal tragedy had transformed into one of the most closely followed courtroom stories in America. Inside Colleton County, emotions remained divided. Some residents believed investigators had uncovered a troubling pattern that pointed toward Alex. Others questioned whether public pressure and non-stop media attention were shaping opinions before every detail had been fully examined. The Murdaugh name had carried influence for generations, and for many, it was difficult to separate reputation from reality. Still, prosecutors continued building their case. Their arguments centered on timing, financial pressure, and the final hours leading up to the events at Moselle on June 7, 2021. According to prosecutors, Alex had been facing growing problems behind the scenes. Questions surrounding missing money inside his law firm had reportedly intensified. Financial records later revealed allegations involving millions of dollars connected to clients, legal settlements, and business accounts. The prosecution argued that exposure was approaching quickly. Court filings and testimony later suggested Alex had allegedly redirected large amounts of money over several years without permission. Prosecutors believed pressure from coworkers and upcoming financial scrutiny created what they described as a desperate situation. Their theory was direct. They argued that the events at the Moselle property created an unexpected shift in focus, changing public attention from financial concerns to sympathy surrounding a family tragedy. But the defense strongly rejected that explanation. Alex's legal team argued that prosecutors were building a case based largely on assumptions and circumstantial evidence. They questioned whether financial allegations, while serious, proved anything about what happened at the property that evening. The defense maintained there was no direct physical evidence clearly connecting Alex to the events. Instead, they suggested investigators had narrowed their focus too early and ignored alternative possibilities. At the center of the legal battle stood one critical question. What happened during the final moments before Maggie and Paul were found near the dog kennels? Investigators spent months reconstructing the timeline. Phone activity, location records, vehicle movements, and witness statements became key pieces of evidence. Prosecutors believe technology helped reveal a clearer picture of the evening than anyone initially realized. Among the most important moments involved a cell phone video recorded by Paul shortly before the incident. The short recording, taken near the dog kennels, reportedly captured voices in the background. Multiple witnesses later testified that one of those voices appeared to belong to Alex Murdaugh. For prosecutors, the video changed everything. Earlier statements had suggested Alex was not at the kennels during the final timeline investigators were examining. But the recording appeared to place him there shortly before emergency responders were contacted. The prosecution argued that the timeline mattered deeply. If Alex had been closer to Maggie and Paul than originally described, investigators believed it raised difficult questions about earlier statements and movements that evening. The defense responded with a different perspective. They argued memory can become unreliable during moments of shock and trauma. According to the defense, inconsistencies did not automatically prove wrongdoing, especially during an emotionally devastating situation. As courtroom proceedings approached, public interest only intensified. National media covered nearly every update. Legal experts debated evidence daily. Podcasts, television specials, and true crime audiences closely followed each new development. For many people, the story felt larger than one criminal case. It involved a family dynasty, financial allegations, public influence, and unanswered questions surrounding trust and power. When the trial officially began in early 2023, the courtroom quickly became the center of national attention. Prosecutors presented witnesses, digital evidence, and financial testimony aimed at establishing motive. The defense challenged interpretations, timelines, and investigative decisions. Every statement was closely examined. Every witness attracted headlines. Every detail sparked debate. Then came one of the trial's most closely watched moments. Alex Murdaugh himself took the witness stand. For days, the country listened carefully as he addressed questions about finances, family relationships, and the timeline surrounding June 7, 2021. He admitted to misleading investigators about certain details during the early stages of the investigation, particularly regarding his location near the dog kennels. However, he denied responsibility for what happened to Maggie and Paul. The testimony became one of the most heavily discussed moments of the trial. Supporters argued his emotional responses reflected grief and pressure. Critics questioned contradictions and inconsistencies raised during questioning. Outside the courthouse, opinions remained sharply divided. Some believed prosecutors had established a compelling timeline. Others felt reasonable doubt still existed. But even beyond the courtroom, another controversy was quietly developing. Few people realized that behind the scenes, concerns would later emerge about the very process responsible for deciding the outcome. At the center of those concerns stood an unexpected figure. Becky Hill, the Colleton County Clerk of Court, became highly visible during and after the proceedings. Public appearances and media attention placed her unexpectedly into the national spotlight. At first, little attention focused on her role. But over time, allegations began surfacing that would raise serious questions about what may have happened behind closed doors during jury deliberations. Claims later emerged suggesting inappropriate communication and possible influence involving jurors responsible for reaching a decision. Questions grew louder. Were outside comments made during the trial process? Did improper behavior affect jurors? Could one of America's biggest true crime verdicts have been shaped by actions unrelated to the evidence itself? At the time, few imagined those questions would eventually reach the highest court in South Carolina, and fewer still expected the answer could completely change the future of the case. Because years after headlines declared the legal battle finished, a dramatic twist would place the entire verdict under fresh scrutiny and reopen one of America's most controversial true crime stories. For many observers, the Alex Murdaugh case appeared finished. The trial had dominated headlines, courtroom footage spread across the country, and legal experts spent months debating every piece of testimony. To supporters of the prosecution, the outcome seemed to close one of the most shocking family cases in recent American history. But major legal stories rarely end quietly. As years passed, questions surrounding the fairness of the courtroom process began attracting growing attention. What first appeared to be isolated concerns slowly developed into something much larger. At the center of those concerns stood Colleton County Court Clerk Becky Hill. Following the trial, Hill became increasingly visible in interviews and public appearances connected to the nationally watched case. Media attention surrounding the proceedings unexpectedly placed her in the spotlight. Then allegations began surfacing that changed everything. Defense attorneys raised concerns that Hill may have engaged in inappropriate communication involving jurors during the trial. According to legal filings, claims emerged suggesting comments may have been made that could have influenced how jurors viewed testimony and courtroom evidence. The accusations quickly drew national attention. Legal experts closely examined whether courtroom procedures had been handled properly. Critics questioned whether even the appearance of outside influence could damage trust in a verdict from such a high-profile case. For prosecutors and supporters of the original outcome, the issue created an uncomfortable reality. Even in cases involving intense public interest, courtroom rules exist for one reason: to protect fairness. The legal system depends on jurors reaching decisions independently, free from outside pressure or influence. If those protections are questioned, courts often face difficult decisions, regardless of how strong or emotional a case may seem. As investigations into the allegations continued, reports suggested growing concerns over claims that jurors may have experienced improper influence connected to courtroom staff behavior. The controversy deepened further when accusations emerged that celebrity attention and personal publicity may have played a role. According to later claims raised in court proceedings, Becky Hill allegedly sought increased public attention connected to the nationally followed trial, including reported interest in promoting a self-published book discussing courtroom events. The allegations stunned many people. For supporters of the original verdict, it raised painful questions. Could one of America's biggest courtroom outcomes be challenged because of concerns unrelated to evidence? And if mistakes had occurred, how far would the courts be willing to go? Then came the turning point no one expected. On May 13, 2026, the South Carolina Supreme Court delivered a decision that sent shockwaves through the legal world. Alex Murdaugh's murder convictions were officially overturned. The court ordered a complete retrial after determining concerns surrounding jury influence required renewed legal examination. The ruling immediately reignited national debate and reopened questions many believed had already been settled. For some observers, the decision represented an important reminder that legal fairness must remain protected in every case, no matter how public or emotional. Others viewed the ruling with frustration, believing years of courtroom proceedings had already produced answers. But one reality became impossible to ignore. The story was no longer simply about one powerful legal family. It had become a national conversation about influence, fairness, media pressure, and trust in the justice system itself. Back in Colleton County, the place where the Murdaugh family name had once represented power and stability now remained permanently connected to one of America's most discussed true crime cases. The legacy of the dynasty had changed forever. A family once known for generations inside courtrooms had become a focus of a legal story followed across the world. Questions surrounding money, influence, personal decisions, and legal accountability continued shaping public opinion long after the first courtroom battle ended. Yet, through every twist, one question remained at the center of the story. What truly happened on that quiet June night at Moselle? For some, the answer felt clear. For others, uncertainty still remained. And now, with a retrial ordered, the possibility of new arguments, new testimony, and renewed scrutiny meant the case was far from over. But before the controversy surrounding appeals and courtroom procedure changed the direction of the story, there had been one defining legal chapter that shaped public opinion across America. After weeks of testimony during the original 2023 trial, Prosecutors argued that financial pressure, changing timelines, and evidence from the property pointed toward Alex Murdaugh's responsibility in the deaths of Maggie and Paul. The defense continued rejecting that claim, maintaining that reasonable doubt remained and arguing the evidence did not conclusively prove what happened that night. In the end, the jury reached a decision. Alex Murdaugh was found guilty in the original trial related to the deaths of his wife, Maggie, and son, Paul. During sentencing, the judge handed down 2 consecutive life sentences without parole. The courtroom moment marked a dramatic fall for a man once connected to one of South Carolina's most influential legal families. Yet years later, the story changed once again. Because in a case filled with unexpected turns, the biggest legal twist came after many believed the final chapter had already been written.